More awkward questions for Trump as more Epstein files are released. So who did or didn't then wish the paedophile a happy 50th birthday?
One thing's certain, the bombshell letters are especially damaging for Peter Mandelson.
Wherever he is in the world, he remains my best pal, one reads. Another Lord Epstein's holiday homes. Yum, yum. Then another, happy birthday, Jeffrey. We love you.
The UK's ambassador to the US has now issued this grovelling apology.
I fell for his lies. I never saw the wrongdoing. Perhaps it's because I'm a gay man.
More revelations are to come, so how damaging could the birthday book scandal get?
He has been sacked twice before. Leopards can't change their spots.
And after a summer to forget, could it have come at a worse time for Keir Starmer?
It's a catastrophe.
That doesn't feel a good place for a Labour leader to be. Welcome to Talking Politics. I'm Tom Bradby.
I'm Robert Peston.
And there's only one place to start. We're recording this straight after Prime Minister's questions, and I think Robert and I would both agree it's the best we've seen Kemi Badenoch. She was sharp, she was focused, she only went on one topic, which she rarely has the discipline to do. It was Peter Mandelson, and let's be honest, Keir Starmer looked very uncomfortable. Before we start discussing it, let's just take a tiny clip of it.
He says the ambassador has expressed full regret, but the victims of the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein have called for Lord Mandelson to be sacked. Was the Prime Minister aware of this intimate relationship?
I watched that and I thought Mandelson's in trouble and Keir Starmer's in trouble over this. Kemi Badenoch, who we've very often said lacks focus at PMQs, she misses the moment, she often has an open goal and fails to score, she has a habit of including 5 subjects instead of going in on the jugular on one. I don't know whether she's gone away for the summer and had better advice and had a rethink, but I thought she was really good today, the best I've seen her. Keir Starmer looked terrible. I mean, he was terrible. What else can you conclude? But he was terrible. He was vague, didn't answer the question, looked uncomfortable. And I found myself thinking, which is what I thought. I was wandering along yesterday and you texted me the Jeffrey Epstein letter from Peter Mandelson in which he said, signed off, your best pal. And as we discussed, my reaction was, oh my God, this is terrible, terrible, terrible. But it's kind of got much worse since then. There's the suggestion that he was doing deals potentially with Jeffrey Epstein after he'd been convicted of being a paedophile. And I guess for me, and I suspect for most people listening or watching this, it's just very, very simple. The idea that you would continue to meet with, be friends with, do business with, potentially stay in the apartment of a guy who's been convicted of being a paedophile is incomprehensible, and it's really hard to me to see how Peter Mandelson survives. What say you?
So, let's just remind people, it was in 2008 that Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty to a charge of procuring an underage girl for prostitution, right? Within
it's horrendous charge.
I mean, I think he was sentenced to, I think it was something like 18 months in prison. Mandelson, in an interview that he's done with Harry Cole of The Sun in Washington, says, I deeply regret allowing Jeffrey Epstein to somehow persuade him, Peter Mandelson, that was somehow not what it looked like, because Mandelson admits he continued to be friends with Epstein after he is out of jail. Now, whether Mandelson will at any point reveal what it is that Epstein said about his criminal conviction, that persuaded Mandelson that it wasn't the kind of offence that would mean you'd want to sever all links. It is sort of mind-boggling to me that he would want to continue to have this relationship with Epstein. Even then, although, as Kemi Badenoch says, at the period that he writes this fawning birthday card, 10 pages, your best pal, pictures of two women, one of whom is wearing a skimpy top and knickers. And Mandelson's comment next to that picture is "your interesting friends," or I think is the phrase that he uses, which, given that we know about the abuse, the paedophile sex that Epstein was engaging in at that time. This is the point that Badenoch made, 2003 to 2005, right? It's his abuse, his paedophilia in that period that ultimately means he then gets convicted again. So there are sort of questions, given how close Mandelson was to him, is why didn't he pick up the rumours or see any of the untoward things that were going on? But as you say, just in terms of what's really damning for Mandelson, it is that 2008 conviction, which Mandelson concedes he knew about, but was somehow persuaded by, Epstein. As I say, each time I say it, I just cannot believe it. He was somehow persuaded by Epstein was sort of okay, right? And this is just sort of mad. And then the Telegraph today publishes extracts from another court case in America, emails between Epstein and Peter Mandelson relating to the £1 billion sale of a business owned by Royal Bank of Scotland, which after the financial crisis was owned by us. It was nationalised. Now, I've done some digging into this, right? I don't believe that Mandelson was intimately involved in the sale of that business. But what these emails basically show is he continued to have an unhealthily close relationship with Epstein. The fact that Epstein can email him apparently for help in a business deal. He at the time was business secretary in Gordon Brown's government. Now, as I say, I've talked to people who were involved in the sale, and they say he wouldn't have had, this was driven by the Treasury, by the then Chancellor Alistair Darling and by the then boss of Royal Bank of Scotland, a bloke called Stephen Hester. I don't think actually this would have been if Mandelson had been saying to Epstein, "I can help." We don't know what the email said, by the way, but if he was saying something like that, he was, to use a phrase, bullshitting. But the fact that he would even take the emails on a sensitive subject like this sale, to anybody like Epstein, but the fact that it was Epstein, convicted paedophile, it's just, you just can't get your head around it. So you're absolutely right. This is horrendous. I mean, there are other aspects of it we can go into in a minute, but this is horrendous for Starmer.
Well, as you mentioned, Peter Mandelson has addressed the revelations in this interview with the podcast Harry Cole Saves the West. So let's have a quick listen.
I felt it like an albatross around my neck since his death in 2018 or 19, when it was. I feel a tremendous sense of regret, not only that I met him in the first place, but that I continued the association. I fell for his lies. I never sought, and nor did he offer any introductions to women in the way that allegedly he did for others. Perhaps it's because I'm a gay man. I don't believe I'm named in Epstein files. I have no doubt at all that there's a lot of traffic, correspondence, emails, exchanges, letters between us. Absolutely. And we know those are going to surface.
You and I have both been around Peter Mandelson long enough to know that he's a communications professional to his, fingertips. And listening to that interview with Harry Cole from The Sun, good scoop for Harry to get. But it's quite clear that there are further revelations coming, because the whole interview, the tone of it is sort of getting his excuses in.
But he also says in terms, there are more emails, they will be published, is what Mandelson said.
Yeah, and Kemi Badenoch, in Prime Minister's Questions, for those who didn't listen to the full thing, has just called for Mandelson to publish all his private emails to Epstein, which we'll wait and see whether that happens. But clearly a lot of them are going to come out one way or another. There are going to be more damaging allegations. And as you say, there are two sort of tiers of questions. One of them is exactly how much time did he spend? Now, it's emerged today, obviously, that one of the people in one of the pictures in the card that Mandelson wrote appears to have been a housekeeper. At least that's what the woman who was the housekeeper on Epstein's paedophile island, as it's known, she's come forward and said, yes, that's me in the picture. And she says that Mandelson was there for a week on that occasion. Now, whether that's right or wrong, a week's quite a long time. I mean, what did he think all these young women who were forever around these places were doing? Why were they there? Did he ask any questions? I just think the questions are going to keep coming, right? It's not like this is one thing and then it's done. The questions are going to keep coming. And for those who've not spent a lot of time listening to the victims in this, I think it is worth just making the point. There was a very good documentary on Netflix not very long ago, and one of the things in the course of it that really struck me is just how impressive the witnesses were. I can't think of a better way to put it. They just came across as completely credible. The stories they told were horrendous, and you just watched and you thought, I just absolutely believe these women. I mean, not suggesting that there's any reason not to believe them, but it's just really upsetting watching them recount what happened. And the way they tell the stories makes you think it would be really hard to be round Epstein and not know that this stuff was going on. Now, possibly Peter Mandelson, he says, well, perhaps it's because I was gay. None of these women was obviously pushed to me for that reason. And perhaps he didn't know, but I certainly think the more that comes out, the more that it becomes obvious that he spent a great deal of time with Jeffrey Epstein, the more these questions are going to keep coming. It's not like, Keir Starmer comes out, defends him today, and this story's gone by the middle of next week. I think it's now going to be, dragging the whole Labour government down for months and months, which is what makes me think that Mandelson's really going to struggle to survive. But at the end of it all, as you've said and I've said, and we just should come back to, one fact is unarguable. Peter Mandelson kept in touch, close touch, and remained a close friend of someone after he was convicted of being a paedophile. And that just is mind-blowing, frankly.
It is. But let's bring it back now to the big politics for the government. We should be under no illusion about this was the Prime Minister's personal appointment, right? He decided.
Not uncontroversial at the time.
It should be very controversial at the time. And there were a number of reasons why it was very high profile and very controversial. One of them was that Mandelson had said some very unflattering things about Trump, which some people thought should rule him out. I mean, actually, we should go back one step, actually, before we get on to that. I mean, I think, look, to give Mandelson the benefit of the doubt, he is a flipping impressive politician when he's not basically doing unbelievably foolish things in his personal life, right?
He is, although having been forced to leave the cabinet twice suggests he's a politician who's incredibly impressive in some ways, but as we've discussed before, lacks that crucial sense of political judgment.
No, I'd put it differently,
okay.
Right? I would say, actually, his political judgment is normally extraordinary, but he takes ridiculous risks in his personal life. His judgment about what he should be doing, these are not political judgments. These are just judgments that anybody should make about the appropriate way to behave, right? None of us should be being pals with Jeffrey Epstein, whether you're, a senior politician.
It's not complicated, is it?
It's not complicated. And so, but this is the point that I was about to make, right? It's controversial because he said things that, he said very critical things about Donald Trump, right? And there were questions about whether he could actually build a relationship with Donald Trump. Actually, a testament to his political ability, to be clear, he has built a pretty impressively good relationship with Donald Trump, despite having said those inflammatory things about him in the past. But the bit of the appointment that was ridiculous in a way was he has been sacked, as you say, twice before because of doing things that were reckless, right? And so you just knew I remember talking to people at the central government. I said, you do know if you appoint Peter Mandelson that there will be an explosion at some point, that whether it's something he does while he's there or something that comes out about his past, it will happen, right? Because that is Peter Mandelson. Leopards can't change their spots. Right? He said at Ditchley, he gave this speech at Ditchley at the weekend, which is this great foreign policy centre, where they had a conference. He said, you've described me as durable. That is the right word. And it is astonishing how durable he's been, given how many, sort of in a sense, falls from grace and scandals there have been. So anyway, Starmer decides to appoint him, despite the fact, presumably he's aware that it's very high risk because of that background, right, of getting into trouble, Mandelson getting into trouble so often. But, what is the choices that he had at the time? Karen Pierce, everybody said, she was the then ambassador to Washington. Yes, it's true, she technically served her time, but there was a lot of talk going on because she'd built astonishingly good relations with the Trump team. There was a lot of talk going on. Just give her another year. Let her do the transition. Smooth relations with Trump, because she did get on very well with all those people, and then appoint in a year's time. Starmer refused to do that. I mean, there's this other fascinating story, right? Which actually, looked controversial, but almost certainly, actually, weirdly, probably would have spared Starmer this particular controversy. But Morgan McSweeney approached George Osborne. This is a fact, right, for the job, right?
I did not know that.
Yeah,
well, widely known.
So Tom Baldwin, Starmer's biographer, first, I can't remember where he revealed it, but I have stood it up, right? It is absolutely true that Morgan McSweeney approached George Osborne, and he ultimately said to George Osborne, Tory, former Chancellor, that he was runner-up in the process, that he came pretty close to getting that job, right? This is a real thing, right? Okay. Anyway, maybe that's now. Let's just get back to where we're...
I've got to stop you for a moment.
Yeah.
It would be too hilarious if Peter Mandelson's... Not hilarious, the wrong word, under the circumstances. Yeah. If Peter Mandelson stepped down now and George Osborne became the ambassador to Washington, which would make... I mean, one of the things I was going to just throw into you, sorry to interrupt your flow, but, one problem, it seems to me, is that President Trump's got his own problems with the Epstein scandal, right? So to remove Peter Mandelson on those grounds might actually be very tricky with the White House. And of course, George Osborne would be able to go in, close friend of J.D. Vance and all the rest of it. There would be a lot to be said for that appointment. I don't know. It's an intriguing concept. Anyway, carry on. That was just
It would also cause absolute uproar on the Labour benches if the man they blame for austerity. So it was sort of amazing. It was more interesting to me that Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff, is really prepared to stick two fingers up to Labour backbenchers to quite that extent. Anyway, let's park the issue of who we would. But you are absolutely right that one of the reasons I presume, there are two reasons why Starmer has just said he didn't say full. He never said I have full confidence. Weirdly, he just said I have confidence in Peter Mandelson. I don't know if the absence of full is significant, given that it was what Badenoch...
Good spot.
Badenoch asked him to say. But he kept saying, I've got confidence. He didn't say full confidence. Anyway, it is sort of... You could argue, from the point of view of the most cynical version of British diplomacy, that actually, given that the biggest problem that Donald Trump has at the moment, that even his MAGA, Make America Great Again, supporters are really critical of him for not publishing the Epstein files, really critical of him. And he himself, is fighting off allegations that he was way too close to Epstein. He denies, he's somehow arguing that it's a fake, but there is an entry in the birthday book, which, Mandelson's 10-page letter is in, which purports to be from Trump. It's, the picture of allegedly the hand-drawn picture of a naked girl signed Donald Trump. Trump is denying he ever did that. But anyway, you could argue that it makes the relationship between Britain an America closer if you've got the British ambassador under fire over Epstein and a president who's under fire. Yeah. They got a mutual bond there.
But it's a terrible look.
It's an appalling look. I'm not arguing for it, but your point is the correct one. That if Starmer sacks, Mandelson in those circumstances, there will be people in America who will draw the obvious conclusion that therefore, Trump is unfit.
Well, since you raise it, and not to get too distracted talking about George Osborne, but I think one thing is true. If Keir Starmer, because Keir Starmer's got an awful problem. Removing Mandelson would not be popular with the White House. That is pretty much obvious. So it's a difficult thing to do at a critical point, particularly just before the state visit, Trump being over here for a state visit. It would be a very, very difficult thing to do. But I would say Keir Starmer is going to take a lot of domestic political damage if he leaves Peter Mandelson in place. I don't think this story is going to blow over in a few days. I think it's going to go on being an albatross around their necks for a really long time. So
it's a catastrophe. We should not understate this for him.
It's a catastrophe.
Because if he doesn't get rid of Mandelson, it will come up every week, probably till the general election, right? This is not far removed. I mean, I wouldn't put it quite as lethal for Labour as parties in Downing Street was for Boris Johnson. But because Peter Mandelson is already in the UK such a famous and in some would say notorious figure in the UK, right? I do think this is potentially hugely problematic for the Labour Party.
This is obviously our first chance to talk about Angela Rayner, and I guess she had to go, but I found myself watching it. I was away last week, watching it from afar, and I found I don't know Angela Rayner personally, but she just seems to me somebody who it's been good for British politics to have. She's colourful. She's got an inspiring, story of emerging from a difficult background. There's so much in a way to admire about Angela Rayner. But here we are. Angela Rayner's gone. Peter Mandelson hasn't. That doesn't feel a good place for a Labour leader to be, I would say.
It's a catastrophe. I mean, Angela Rayner, I said this a lot last week, one of the towering figures of modern politics at a time when so many British politicians are thoroughly mediocre, right? Good communicator, amazing life story, charismatic, actually appears politically to make, pretty reasonable decisions, right? Now, so she's a massive loss to the Labour front bench. And frankly,
did you think she had to go on with looking back on it now and on reflection? Because I thought maybe she did.
I think for a prime minister, I do think for a prime minister who was elected on, we are going to clean up politics. I am giving proper authority to the ethics advisor. When the ethics advisor, the final paragraph said unambiguously she breached the ministerial code of conduct. It is true there are breaches and breaches, but 2 paragraphs before that, again, he says unambiguously that on this issue of the stamp duty that she was supposed to pay, one of her legal advisors suggested that she take expert legal advice, and the other one actually recommended that she take expert tax advice, or expert tax advice in both cases were suggested or recommended. She didn't follow what her legal advisors were telling her to do. And I do think that we don't know why she didn't. We don't know if she's just too busy or she didn't read the documents carefully enough. We don't know the background to it. Unfortunately, I did think once I read the letter, there was absolutely no wriggle room for her. It would have gone on, and again, a bit like if she hadn't gone, the Tories again would have, because it would never have gone away, and it would have massively undermined Keir Starmer's "I do things differently, all my ministers follow the rules." Right? I feel very sorry for her, because I suspect that this was some kind of weird lapse. At some point, presumably, she'll tell us what happened that she didn't follow, what was the clear advice. And certainly, it is, miles away, right, from being in dispute with Inland Revenue about an absolutely massive tax liability, which Zahawi was in, and then becoming Chancellor, where you have essentially responsibility for HMRC, and not disclosing any of that, and indeed making public statements when people are accusing him of being in dispute, making public statements through that, through his advisors, that this is all nonsense, right?
But do you see what I mean? Do you see what I mean? I think we're in agreement here, but essentially, a lot of people listening to this or watching this may not like me saying this, but I personally think that was a bit of a marginal call. We don't really know why she didn't take/follow this tax advice. She has an incredibly compelling, backstory generally, but particularly to this, with her son and so on. It's a difficult situation.
All right, I'm going to disagree with you, because you have to remember this also came not that long after there was also controversy around, whether or not she should have paid capital gains tax on a property sale. She was on notice. Yeah. She was on notice, right, that she had to take tax issues seriously. Yeah. She was housing minister. This was right in her patch. Look, I'm really sorry. I do completely disagree. I'm afraid once she didn't take the advice of her lawyers, she was toast. There was honestly, I feel sorry for her, and I do think Starmer is going to, I think this is really damaging to his government, right? Yeah. So I'm downplaying the significance, but I don't think he or she had any choice.
I'll concede that point. I think we're in agreement. Where we are at the moment, a woman who people I think probably did have quite a lot of sympathy for, and was, by the way, I'm not saying the stories weren't legitimate, but I never have quite understood why the right-wing press seemed to hate Angela Rayner so much. But anyway, that's probably a different discussion.
Well, it's partly because she stood up to him.
Yeah, but they went for the stories were legitimate. Perhaps she had to go, but we're in this very uncomfortable position. Well, Keir Starmer is in this very uncomfortable position where she's gone, where people have quite a lot of sympathy, and she was a very charismatic figure, very important to his administration. And so far, Peter Mandelson, who was by his own admission still best pals with and doing business with a convicted paedophile after he was convicted of being a paedophile, that I just think that is going to be a running sore, and I cannot imagine it will continue. And I think if it does, it will damage this government, as you say, maybe not quite as much as Partygate, but who knows? I mean, I think it will get cut through. I think everyone in the country will.
It's going to massively cut through. You just have to, those pictures of him hobnobbing with Epstein are everywhere. Yeah. Everybody will see them. And that's all that that he was friends with a convicted paedophile. That's what we'll stay with. Okay. We'll stay with it. But there's another aspect of all of this, right, which I think is important, okay, which is, in my view, and I'm confident of this for all sorts of reasons, Rayner will come back. She's not done, right? She's not finished, right? This incident, yes, awfully embarrassing for her, but she can come back from this. At some point, she will explain what happened. I think at some point, the Labour Party and maybe the British people will give her the benefit of the doubt. But she will come back, I assume, as no friend to Keir Starmer, right? They've always had a tricky relationship. Actually, until this blew up, they'd actually found an impressive way of working together, helping each other. I cannot see circumstances in which her career revives and she is anything other than somebody who is offering a pretty significantly important challenge to, she may decide, I don't want to be leader now, given how awful this period has been. But I do not believe that she is any longer a Starmer loyalist. And if I were Starmer, that would also bother me, right? Because, he hasn't got a lot of friends in politics. And if she becomes essentially the fulcrum, the focus for a different approach to running this government and running Labour Party, that is really damaging for him.
Let's just talk for a brief moment about the other challenges this autumn. I'm sure you were thinking about it over the summer. I spent possibly more time than was good for me kind of pondering everything that's happened and thinking about it. And I, probably like most people listening or watching this podcast, I just thought, right, it comes down to, this government has to sort out immigration between now and Christmas. They've just got to come up with some more radical solutions. And if they don't, I actually thought for the first time, I could see a reform government. I found it hard to imagine that given the electoral mass and everything else up until now. But I finally thought, if they, just because so many people reference, I'm in an airport, in an airport queue, people start chatting. It's one of the first things they mention. I get on a plane, somebody else starts chatting. It's the first thing they mention. It's like, it's got to the point where I think if they don't, that's problematic. I also think, I sort of feel like imperceptibly Rachel Reeves's room for manoeuvre over the course of the year and indeed the summer has narrowed when it comes down to the budget. I think if she substantially raises taxes or anything, that will kill this government. So I think she's in a terrible hole as well.
I'm going to slightly sort of a couple of nuances on that.
Okay.
So let's be absolutely clear. Small boats will not be solved by Christmas. I personally think they've got a bit longer, but you're absolutely right. It's an enormously important issue. And jury's out whether they will persuade the British people that they are moving the small boats issue in the right kind of direction. I feel slightly sorry for Yvette Cooper, who, although she's been promoted, many would say, to be Foreign Secretary, that they're basically through private briefings, Downing Street is basically trashing her, clearing out all the. But actually, she negotiated this deal with France. That was her. Yeah, right? That wasn't the Prime Minister. That was her. She negotiated the deal with France on, getting maybe small numbers of asylum seekers repatriated to France. She's negotiated important arrangements with Iraq. She was in talks with Germany. I think actually, so I think her contribution has probably been a bit underrated, and I feel a bit sorry for Shabana Mahmood because, given how difficult this job is, if Downing Street's going to trash Yvette Cooper, who actually I think made some progress, my goodness, the heat is on her, right? Because this is not easy. No. But so that's one thing. But secondly, I do think the big event of the autumn is the budget on November the 26th. It's almost as late as it could possibly be. We're going to get all sorts of damaging speculation between now and then. Taxes are going to go up. I mean, damaging in terms of confidence in the economy is why I say damaging speculation. Taxes are going to go up, maybe by 30 billion odd, maybe a bit more than that quid. It's a lot of money that has to be raised. And to be clear, the issue is whether it is an economic sort of mess or a political mess. That is the choice that faces them in this budget. It is a choice, right? Because if you're the least damage, and you will hear this from business leaders, right? I can't precisely remember, but it may be that the CBI has said this overnight. I can't remember. But it captures something that is very much a talking point at the moment in the private sector, which is they know taxes have to go up, right? And they are saying, and this is correct, this is the right economics, if you've got to put taxes up, right, the best way of doing it is to spread the burden as widely as possible. And that means putting up either VAT or the income tax rate or both, right? It is the least painful to the economy, to growth. Those are the least painful tax changes this government can make, right? Almost anything else they do, fiddling around with all the other different taxes, will undermine important sectors. They will be narrowly focused. They will damage confidence. They will damage international confidence in the UK and domestic confidence. there's all sorts of clever things they could do. But these things, when you've got to raise that sum of money, it is nuts. But if they put up VAT and income tax, at that point, you would probably argue their prospects of winning the next election are written off, because they will have broken some would say the most important promises in that manifesto. They may have been unbelievably foolish to put those in their manifesto, but from now, if they put up at the income tax rate or VAT or both, from now to the election, Tory and Reform will simply say, all the way to the election, they lied to you on the most important things that matter.
That's a good place to end, or a bad place to end if you're a Keir Starmer fan. But what we should do is a special episode where we look at all the potential tax changes they could make and pluses and minuses. I think that would be really worth doing. But that's it for now. We will be back soon to answer your questions on Talking Politics Q&A. If you haven't already, please do hit subscribe on YouTube or on any podcast platform to make sure you never miss out on an episode. Thanks for joining us. And for now, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. See you soon.